The last thing I expected when I walked out of my childhood home that night was that I would never look back the same way again. My father's words followed me into the darkness, cutting deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I stood on the front porch with a suitcase in my hand, tears running down my face, wondering how the man who raised me could suddenly decide I no longer belonged there. But what he didn't know was that the very next morning, my entire life was about to change forever. Before we begin this emotional journey, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected blessings, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind us never to give up. My name is Caleb Whitmore, and for most of my life, I believed my father, Jonathan Whitmore, was the strongest person I knew. We lived in Chicago, Illinois, in a beautiful neighborhood where everyone knew our family name. My father was a successful businessman who built his company from nothing, and from the outside, our family looked perfect. But behind the expensive cars, luxury vacations, and massive house was a relationship between a father and son that had slowly started falling apart. After my mother passed away when I was 16, my father changed. The warm, patient man I remembered became distant and cold. He buried himself in his work, believing success could fill the emptiness left behind. I understood his pain, but over the years I began feeling like I was competing against a memory I could never replace. I tried everything to make him proud. I studied hard, worked part-time jobs, and even joined his company after college. But nothing seemed enough. My father always saw my mistakes before my efforts. Every achievement felt small, and every failure felt like proof that I wasn't the son he wanted. The night everything changed started with a family dinner. My father had invited some important business partners over, and I had spent the entire day helping prepare. I thought maybe this would finally be the night he would see how much I cared. But during dinner, a disagreement about the future of the company turned into an argument between us. My father looked at me with disappointment in his eyes, and in front of everyone, he said words I never thought I would hear. He told me I was no longer welcome in his home. He said I needed to leave and figure out my own life without depending on him. I stood there frozen. The room became silent. The people around the table looked uncomfortable, but nobody said anything. I wanted my father to take those words back. I wanted him to realize he was hurting me, but his expression remained hard, so I quietly walked upstairs, packed a small suitcase, grabbed a few personal belongings, and walked out of the only home I had ever known. That night, I drove through the streets of Chicago with no destination. I parked near a quiet lake and sat there for hours, thinking about every moment that brought me to that point. I felt angry, heartbroken, and completely lost. The person I wanted approval from the most was the person who had pushed me away. But somewhere deep inside, I remembered something my mother used to tell me. She always said that sometimes life closes one door because another one is waiting somewhere you never expected. The next morning, I woke up to a phone call that would completely change my future. The caller was an attorney named Michael Reynolds, someone I had never met before. He asked if he was speaking with Caleb Whitmore and told me there was something important I needed to know about my mother's family. I thought it was a mistake. My mother's side of the family had always been quiet. After her death, I barely knew anything about them. But Michael explained that my grandfather, who had passed away years earlier, had left behind a private inheritance that had been kept secret until I reached a certain age. I could barely process what I was hearing. My grandfather had been a successful real estate investor in California. Over decades, he had built a fortune that included properties, businesses, and investments. According to the documents, I was the rightful owner of a Malibu estate that had been placed in a trust for me, a $30 million mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I thought it was impossible. The night before, I had been sitting in my car wondering where I would sleep. And now, I was being told I owned one of the most beautiful homes on the California coast. But the biggest surprise wasn't the mansion itself. It was the letter my grandfather had left for me. In that letter, he wrote that wealth was never meant to define a person. He said money could buy comfort, but it could never buy character. He wanted me to remember that kindness, humility, and compassion were the true measures of success. Those words stayed with me. A few days later, I arrived in Malibu. As I drove up the private road leading to the mansion, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The house stood above the ocean with breathtaking views, huge glass windows, beautiful gardens, and rooms bigger than any place I had ever lived. But instead of feeling like a winner, I felt strangely emotional, because the person I wanted to share that moment with was my father. I had everything I could have dreamed of, but I still felt the pain of losing my family connection. The mansion was beautiful, but it couldn't replace a father's acceptance. Over the following months, I decided to use my new opportunity differently. Instead of living a life focused only on luxury, I started helping people who were struggling. I created programs for young adults who had nowhere to turn, donated to local charities, and supported families facing difficult times. Slowly, I began discovering who I really was. Then, one afternoon, I received another unexpected visitor. It was my father. Jonathan stood outside my Malibu home looking different from the man who had thrown me out. He looked older, quieter, and filled with regret. The anger that once controlled him had disappeared. Seeing him again brought back every painful memory, but it also reminded me that people can change. My father admitted that he had spent years chasing success while losing sight of what mattered most. He told me that after I left, he realized the house felt empty without me. The company meant nothing when he had lost the relationship with his own son. For the first time in years, we sat together and talked honestly. There were no arguments, no pride, and no pretending. Just a father and son trying to understand each other. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means choosing peace instead of carrying anger forever. My Malibu mansion was never the greatest gift I received. The greatest gift was finding my way back to myself and realizing that my worth was never determined by my father's approval or by the amount of money I had. Sometimes life takes everything away from you just before it reveals something you never imagined was possible. If this story touched your heart, please support this video by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who may need a reminder that hope can appear even in the darkest moments. Before we reach the ending, I want to ask you something special. Comment a second chance if you believe people can change and families can heal. Years later, whenever I looked at the ocean from my Malibu home, I no longer remembered the night I was kicked out. I remembered the morning my life began again. I remembered that sometimes rejection is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the beginning of a new chapter waiting for you. And the greatest victories in life are not about what you own. They are about who you become when everything changes.